My grandmother Evelyn Stone died on a Tuesday in October, which was appropriate because she hated Tuesdays almost as much as she hated my mother. "Nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday," she used to say, stabbing her fork into a piece of fish she'd ordered dry and then complained about. "It's the day of the week where hope goes to die." She was wrong about that, as she was wrong about most things. Hope didn't die on a Tuesday. Hope died the moment the lawyer opened the envelope and read the will aloud to the assembled family, and I realized that my grandmother had spent the last 20 years of her life pretending to love me while quietly erasing me from the only thing that mattered to her: her money. I was 28 when she died. My name is Claire. I am the only child of Margaret Stone, who was the only child of Evelyn Stone, who inherited a textile fortune from her father in 1978 and spent the next 40 years turning it into a real estate empire. The Stones are not old money. We are new money that worked very hard to look old. We have manners and etiquette and a summer house in Newport that my grandmother bought at auction because she wanted to impress people who would never accept her. My mother Margaret died when I was 12. Cancer. Fast and brutal and mercifully short. I remember sitting in the hospital room holding her hand, watching the machines beep and fade, and I remember thinking that my grandmother would take care of me now. That's what grandmothers do. They step in when mothers are gone. Evelyn did take care of me. In a way. She sent me to the best schools. She bought me nice clothes. She made sure I had a room in her house, the big house, the one with the marble floors and the chandelier that had belonged to a French duke. She taught me which fork to use and how to address a duke and how to laugh without showing my teeth. But she never loved me. I know that now. What she felt for me was obligation, and obligation is just love with all the warmth removed. The proof was in the will. The lawyer, a thin, bald man named Mr. Hartley, who had been trembling slightly the entire time he read, cleared his throat and announced that the bulk of Evelyn Stone's estate, approximately $47 million, was to be placed in a trust for the benefit of my beloved grandson, Charles Stone III. Charles Stone III is my cousin, my father's sister's son. A boy who had never once visited my grandmother in the hospital when she was sick. A boy who had called her old money bags behind her back. A boy who, at the age of 30, had never held a job for longer than 6 months and had already been arrested twice for possession of cocaine. He was not beloved. He was not even liked, but he had a penis, and apparently that was enough. I received a single bequest, a painting. A small watercolor of a flower that my grandmother had painted herself decades ago before she'd decided that art was a waste of time. It was worth maybe $50. It was also, I realized later, a message. You are not an heir. You are a decoration. Be grateful for your flower and go away. The reading of the will took place in the library of the big house, the same library where my grandmother had taught me to play chess, the same library where I had hidden during parties, reading books while the adults drank and laughed and forgot I existed. The same library where, 3 days before she died, my grandmother had called me into her room and said, "Claire, I want you to know that I've taken care of everything." I thought she meant me. I thought she meant that she had left me the house, or the trust, or at least enough money to live on while I finished my PhD in art history. I thought she meant that all those years of etiquette lessons and charity galas and pretending to be a stone had been building towards something. She meant Charles. She had taken care of Charles. I was an afterthought, a watercolor, a footnote in the story of her life. I sat in the library, surrounded by my family, my Aunt Patricia, who had always hated me, my Uncle Robert, who had never spoken to me, my cousin Charles, who was smirking into his champagne glass, and I felt something crack open inside me. Not my heart. My heart had been cracked since my mother died. Something deeper. Something that had been holding me together, piece by piece, year by year. That thing broke. And in its place, something new began to grow. Revenge. Not the hot, screaming kind. Not the kind that ends with a scene and a slap and a door slamming. The kind that takes time. The kind that requires patience and intelligence and a willingness to get your hands dirty. The kind that my grandmother would have respected if she'd had any respect for anyone who wasn't herself. I started with the house, the big house, the Newport mansion, the one with the French Duke's chandelier, was not included in the trust. It was a separate asset, deeded directly to my Aunt Patricia, Charles's mother. Patricia had always wanted the house. She'd spent her entire life circling it like a shark, waiting for my grandmother to die so she could move in and redecorate in shades of beige and cream, erasing every trace of the woman who had raised her. But here's the thing about the house. It was haunted, not by ghosts, by paperwork. My grandmother had bought it at auction in 1985, but she had never completed the title transfer properly. There was a lien on the property from a previous owner, a lien that had been accruing interest for 30 years, a lien that, if enforced, would cost Patricia nearly $2 million to resolve. How did I know this? Because my grandmother had told me. One night, drunk on sherry, she had confessed that she'd hidden the lien paperwork in a box under her bed. "Never let them find it," she'd said, laughing. "Let them fight over the ashes." I found the box. It took me 3 days of searching because Patricia had already started organizing my grandmother's belongings, which meant shoving everything into garbage bags and piling them in the garage. But I found it. A manila envelope, yellowed with age, containing the original lien notice and a letter from my grandmother's lawyer, the previous lawyer, not Mr. Hartley, advising her to resolve the matter immediately. She never had. She had kept it as a weapon, a hidden bomb waiting to explode. I didn't tell Patricia about the lien. I didn't tell anyone. I waited. I watched Patricia move into the house, watched her hire contractors to redo the kitchen, watched her spend money she didn't have on marble countertops and custom cabinetry. And then, 6 months after the will was read, I sent an anonymous letter to the line holder, a bank that had long since been absorbed into a larger bank, informing them that the property had changed hands and that the lien was now enforceable. The bank moved quickly. Patricia was served with papers 3 weeks later. She couldn't afford to pay the lien. She had spent most of her inheritance on the renovations. She tried to fight it in court. I made sure she lost. Not by doing anything illegal, just by being in the right place at the right time with the right documents. The house was sold at auction. Patricia got nothing. The buyer was a shell company I had set up 6 months earlier, using money I'd borrowed from a friend who trusted me. The shell company bought the house for a fraction of its value. The shell company then transferred the deed to me. I own the big house now. I live in it. The French Duke's chandelier hangs in the front hall, and every time I walk under it, I think of my grandmother. Not with love, with something colder, something that looks like love if you squint, but is actually just the satisfaction of a game well played. That was phase 1. Phase 2 was Charles. Charles had inherited $47 million, which is an obscene amount of money for a man who could barely tie his own shoes. He spent the first year after my grandmother's death doing exactly what everyone expected: buying cars, throwing parties, dating women who were young enough to be his daughters and expensive enough to bankrupt a small country. I let him. I watched from a distance, through social media and mutual friends and the occasional family gathering where he would brag about his new yacht, or his new girlfriend, or his new private jet. I let him burn through money like it was tissue paper. Because I knew something that Charles didn't know. The trust had a clause. My grandmother was many things: cruel, manipulative, linsey, stingy, as her mother would have said, but she was not stupid. She had put a condition in the trust. Charles would receive the full inheritance only if he remained gainfully employed and free from legal judgment for a period of 10 years. If he failed either condition, the trust would be liquidated and the proceeds donated to a list of charities that my grandmother had personally selected. The charities were all fake. I learned that later, when I found a second envelope under my grandmother's bed, this one labelled, "For Claire's Eyes Only." The envelope contained a letter, not a will, a confession. "Dear Claire, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and Patricia and Charles have probably already tried to cut you out of everything. I'm sorry about the will. I had to write it that way. Patricia threatened to sue if I left you the money, and I didn't have the energy to fight her. I'm old, I'm tired, I'm dying, but I'm not stupid. The trust for Charles is a trap. He'll fail within 2 years. He's too lazy and too stupid not to. When he does, the money doesn't go to the charities listed in the trust document. That list is a decoy. The real beneficiary is a second trust, one that I set up with a different lawyer, one that Patricia doesn't know about. That trust has your name on it. All of it. $47 million, plus the house, plus everything else. I couldn't tell you while I was alive. Patricia would have found out. But I'm telling you now, from wherever I am, that you were always the one I loved. Not Charles, not Patricia, you. You reminded me of myself when I was young, fierce, smart, unwilling to be pushed around. I knew you would figure it out. I knew you would find the boxes and read the letters and understand that this was always your inheritance, not theirs. Be happy, Claire, and don't let them take anything from you. Love, Grandma. I read that letter 17 times. I cried for the first time since my mother died. I cried because I had been wrong about my grandmother. She hadn't erased me. She had hidden me. She had built a maze of lies and traps and false wills, and at the center of the maze was a gift so large and so unexpected that I couldn't breathe when I understood it. Charles failed the trust conditions within 18 months. He was arrested for drunk driving, his third offense, which was a felony in our state. The arrest triggered the legal judgment clause. The trust was liquidated. The charities received nothing, because the charities didn't exist. Instead, the money flowed into the second trust, the one my grandmother had set up with the secret lawyer. That lawyer contacted me on a Wednesday. Not a Tuesday. A Wednesday. "Congratulations," he said. "You are now the sole beneficiary of the Evelyn Stone Legacy Trust. The balance is approximately $43 million. Charles spent about $4 million before the trust was frozen. The remaining funds are yours." I didn't celebrate. I didn't scream or cry or jump up and down. I just sat in my kitchen in the big house that I already owned, and I thought about my grandmother, about the way she had played chess with me in the library, teaching me to think 3 moves ahead, about the way she had called me into her room 3 days before she died and said, "I've taken care of everything." She had. She had taken care of everything. She had just taken care of it in a way that required me to be patient, to be smart, to be willing to fight. The last piece of revenge was the smallest, but it was also the sweetest. My Aunt Patricia, after losing the house, had moved into a small condo on the other side of town. She was bitter and broke and angry, and she spent most of her energy trying to convince anyone who would listen that I had stolen everything from her. I didn't steal anything. I just found what my grandmother had left me. But Patricia didn't see it that way, and I didn't care enough to correct her. One day, about a year after the trust money was released, I received a letter from Patricia. It was handwritten on cheap paper, and the handwriting was shaky. She was asking for money. Not a lot, just enough to cover her medical bills. She had cancer, she said. The same cancer that had killed my mother. The same cancer that had killed her mother before that. I read the letter. I set it down. I thought about whether to respond. In the end, I wrote back. A single sentence on a single sheet of paper. The lien on the house was $2 million. You spent $4 million on renovations. You had 7 years to find the box under the bed. You didn't look. Grandma told me that laziness is its own punishment. I think she was right. I mailed the letter. I never heard from Patricia again. She died 6 months later. I didn't go to the funeral. I sent flowers, white lilies, her favorite, with a card that said, "From the big house." Petty? Yes. Small? Yes. But revenge doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it just has to be remembered. I live in the big house now, alone except for my dog, a rescue mutt I named Evelyn. I walk through the rooms every morning and touch the walls and remember the woman who taught me to play chess and to think 3 moves ahead and to never let anyone see you cry. The watercolor, the one my grandmother left me in the will, hangs in my bedroom. It's not worth $50. It's worth everything. Not because it's beautiful, but because it was the decoy. The thing they overlooked. The thing they thought was an insult, but was actually a promise. You are not erased, the watercolor says. You are just hidden. And one day, you will be found. I was found. I found myself. And I took back what was always mine. That's the thing about family revenge. It's not about destroying the people who hurt you. It's about becoming the person they never thought you could be. It's about looking at the will, the one that tried to write you out of the story, and realizing that you are the one holding the pen. My grandmother gave me the pen. She just hid it in a box under her bed, waiting for me to be brave enough to find it. I found it. I wrote my own ending, and I'm still writing.